with all of that. So if I could, in essence, do a little summarization. I realize some of you maybe. If you're just walking in right now, sorry. We started last night and I've gone all day today, and so it's really difficult for me to summarize in any great way. But let me just do some little summarization, maybe pick up with the question that was asked at the end, which I thought was a good question, and maybe expand upon that a little bit. And then we'll be taking some questions, so you'll be able to get involved at that particular point in time. I do not claim to have all answers, especially when it comes to a lot of the details of some of the historical movements. There's many things you could ask me about the Frankfurt School where I'd go, I don't remember, or I've never read that, or whatever else it might be. As I said, my motivation for this has from the beginning been very much associated with seeing the threat to the unity of the church that is represented by critical theory and by the meaningful or consistent application of critical theory within the church. And so with that, let me just remind you that we have primarily been looking at social justice. What did Voddie say about social justice? Well, it is primarily focused upon the redistribution of, we would use, he didn't use this terminology, but it's the redistribution of wealth. It is the redistribution of resources to address oppression. And this oppression is only defined as groups. It is not defined as anything other than that. Outside the United States, it's viewed differently than it is within the United States. And the biggest problem that we're facing is that social justice within the church is defined. There are people who are seeking to define that term biblically, and hence bring social justice concepts into the church, only for all of us to recognize that in the final analysis, it's not a biblical definition that is being promoted, but very much a political and social definition, which is, there really isn't any question about what social justice means within the academy, within the political sphere. But when it comes to us Christians, we have a lot of people who are preying upon us, to be honest with you, and preying upon the fact that that term justice means a lot. You cannot overemphasize the reality that, for example, in the Psalter, we have, this has always been sort of burned into my mind because if you go to seminary and you take Hebrew at the same time that your daughter is born, so that you are not getting sufficient sleep while trying to learn Hebrew, it impacts you for the rest of your life. It really, really does. And so it is interesting to me that the last class of Hebrew I took, which was an advanced class, we translated from the Psalter, and one of the Psalms that we translated, off the top of my head, I think it was around 96. It's in the 90s, I remember that. There is this incredible picture, and what is said is that justice is the foundation of his throne. And it's not that the terms related to judgment, mishpat, and righteousness, tzedakah, things like that are difficult to translate, but it was just the picture. I was really growing in my appreciation of Hebrew poetry at that particular point in time. You finally get good enough in translating Hebrew that you start going, ooh, this stuff's cool. Up till then, it's just, why does this language, every word only have 3 letters? I can't remember what any of the words are. Can you imagine if all your vocabulary words, they all had 3 letters? Believe me, they start melding into one another very, very quickly, especially when the baby's getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning. That doesn't help with your vocabulary either. But anyway, justice is the foundation of his throne. And you can make a very, very strong argument from Psalm 82, from that psalm, that one of the central affirmations about Yahweh, the word that we slaughter is Jehovah in English, one of the central affirmations about Yahweh in the Old Testament, but especially in the Psalter, is the reality that he is just in all that he does, and he will establish justice. But that is not the case at this particular point in time. And so, remember the one psalm where the psalmist has experienced tremendous injustice. And the psalm ends without his finding resolution. And it's meant to end there, because there have been times when God's people's lives have ended without experienced justice in this life. And hence, one of the themes is that true faith in the true and living God is a faith that continues to believe that his throne is built upon justice, even when we do not experience that fully in our lives. Our faith continues to be that he will accomplish that justice. And one of the things that, interestingly enough, one of the things that non-Christians have noticed, and the Christians should have been the first ones to notice this, to be very honest with you, is that in the modern social justice movement there is a tremendous confusion between cosmic justice and human justice. What do I mean by those two things? We affirm cosmic justice. Part of the Christian worldview is that we know that in the end, justice will be done. The very gospel itself, the whole essence of the gospel is that you will either receive justice or you will receive mercy, but no one will ever receive injustice in the final state. You will either be justly condemned for your sins, which you loved and did not repent from, or you will receive mercy from God, undeserved grace, so that in light of the work of Christ, he provides justice for you. He bears the penalty of your sin, but no one receives injustice. And it's a given when you think of what Paul's argument in Romans 3 is. When he talks about the justification of God, it is a given that in the final day, his wisdom and his goodness and his righteousness is going to be vindicated. And it has always been the conviction of the people of God that this is the way that it is. And that's what has given Christian people the patience to endure in so many situations, and the Jewish people before that in so many situations, because there is a conviction that God will do justice in the end. There will be cosmic justice, but we recognize that does not necessarily mean that will be in this life. Remember the psalmist in Psalm 73, where he almost lost his faith. He saw the righteous died young, and the wicked lived to an old age, and a fat old age, and died in their sleep. And how can this be? And then he says, until I entered into the temple, and I began to worship, and I began to see the final end. You see, the psalmist in that psalm recognizes if you confuse cosmic justice, which is what God's going to bring about at the end, with human justice, the temporal situation we face now, you can end up losing your faith, losing your mind. But God is worthy of faith. He is going to bring these things to that final day of judgment, and in that final day of judgment, he is going to be shown to have been just. And the universe is going to see his wisdom in what he has done in Jesus Christ. That is the ultimate confession that Christians make. And that gives us patience in this life. We don't demand cosmic justice. For example, in the Old Testament law, we are told, And again, I mentioned that I mentioned this last night, but I did a whole series on the Holiness Code. And one of the things that I had to emphasize is that the emphasis in God's law is in the protection of the innocent, not necessarily the punishment of the guilty. So for example, a lot of people have said, well, you know, the demand of God's law that you have 2 or 3 witnesses, that means that means people can get away with things. Because there are times you're not going to have 2 or 3 witnesses. And God's law says that's exactly right. Because you protect the innocent. But that means somebody will get away with it. Not cosmically. They may get away with it in this life, yeah. But they're not going to get away with it in the next. And so you could have the proper balance. Protect the innocent. But see, we've lost that because there's no more judgment. You see what happens when you no longer have a God who's going to judge? You have to have cosmic justice now. And so what do we see happening in our society? We see what happened to Justice Kavanaugh. That was not a just situation. I don't care whatever side you come down, that was not a just situation. When you apply biblical standards, that was not a just situation. And why was it? Because people are saying, we need to have justice now. Because there's no justice to come. There's no justice to come. There is no day of judgment. Once you die, you're fertilizer. That's it. And so when you have a worldview where there can be no cosmic justice, then you need to bring those categories into the present, which means the innocent can no longer remain innocent. You have to adopt a standard whereby you are attempting to justice when you don't have enough information to do it the way God can. God has all the information. And God's not limited. I mean, for example, you look at those Kavanaugh hearings, you're trying to dig stuff up from what, 30 some odd years in the past. We don't have the ability to do that. There used to be a time in our country, there was something called a statute of limitations. You couldn't dig stuff up from 30 years ago because there wasn't any way to do justice anymore about that situation. So why is that now considered a terrible, horrible thing? Because we don't have any hope of cosmic justice. So now we've got to do it ourselves. And man, do we make a mess of it. Man, do we make a mess of it. And so some people here, they go, no, you're just giving up on demanding justice. No, you just need to recognize that mankind only has a certain capacity to do justice in this life. And if you have a Christian understanding of the universe, if you have a Christian understanding of creation, if you have a Christian understanding of man, then you recognize why there was great wisdom in the founders of this particular republic, not democracy, this particular republic. What did they do? They separated powers. They diffused powers. Why did they do that? Because they were all a bunch of Calvinists? No. But they had been around enough of them that they were scared of them. There were a few Calvinists amongst them. Reverend Witherspoon, for example. But they had been around enough of them that they had been influenced by them, and they had a very healthy understanding of the evil that inhabits the heart of man. And when you put a tremendous amount of power in the hands of a small number of people, what happens? They become corrupted by that power. And so you diffused the power. That was from a biblical insight, and it was wise. It was wise. And so I recently read a book. What was it called? Oh, now let me warn you. Let me warn you. The author is a gay atheist. A gay atheist. But it's called The Madness of Crowds. And I read it recently. Did you see it? You're nodding. The Madness of Crowds. Am I correct on the title?
That's pretty great.
I read it on Kindle too. The Madness of Crowds. And here you've got a gay atheist who sees the absurdity of where our culture is going. with critical theory, everything that I've discussed here. I warn you, because when he quotes people, he quotes them in full. There are no bleeped out words in his quotations of people, because he sees what's happening on our college campuses. He sees how the campuses have been taken over by radical leftists who cannot allow for freedom of thought or liberty or anything like that. He sees how the homosexual movement itself has gone way beyond what it had demanded and is now trying to present itself as a protected status. And he sees things more clearly than some Christians see things, which is an amazing thing to consider. But this issue of what it is that is being demanded, when you see what the general direction is, again, we have 1984 coming our direction. Because if you demand cosmic justice and then you redefine justice as the removal of oppression, there is only one way to do that, and that is with an all-powerful government. An all-powerful government. And Christianity has a long history dealing with governments that set themselves up as the ultimate authority, and let me just say, it's never been good. It's never been a friendly relationship. And so here we are. And so the question was asked, well, I'm depressed now. Do you have any words for me as I'm leaving now that I feel depressed? And so let me just expand briefly upon what I said at the end of the last session. I get it. This is probably the second least favorite topic that I would like to address. The one that I like to address even less, which I think I've done here at some point, was the loss and grieving stuff. Did I do grieving once? No? Good. Well, now you know I don't want to. Next year, thanks. That's to our 20th anniversary on dying. Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. I'm sorry?
Did you say the title?
Yes. I wrote the loss and grieving. Most people don't know that my second most popular book, sales-wise, over the years, is called Grieving: Our Path Back to Peace. It is a small little book on grieving, on the loss of loved ones. It was being, I'm proud to say, was being handed out by the carton load to the first responders on September 13th, 2001 in New York City. It has had a blessed life. It really has, because it has helped a lot of people. I've had a number of people contact me. The book had kept them from suicide. And so, but it's a hugely difficult topic to try to address for me. It's just incredibly draining. Really, really is. And so I didn't know if I had done that subject at one point in time in the past or not, but that's the toughest one. This is right next to it. We'll be taking questions in a second. But in answer to the question, well, so what do we do? I briefly pointed out, look, I don't have a panacea answer. Things may get worse before they get better. When I look at the history of how God has dealt with nations in the past, there is precedent for nations that have been incredibly blessed to fall into utter oblivion. There is precedent when a nation has had tremendous light and then has sinned against that light and suppressed that light and run from that light to be plunged into great darkness. And my understanding as I look not only at the history of the church, but at Scripture, is that those are matters in the hands of God. I, as a follower of God, are called to be faithful in whatever context He has called me to live. And I don't get to go, oh yeah, but my grandparents had it a whole lot easier than I do. So, I wasn't born in my grandparents' time. It would have been an easier time to be a Christian in many ways. But that's not where I am. And so my constant prayer needs to be, how do I live wisely and faithfully in the context in which God has called me to live? Many people want to say, what is my hope for the future? Well, as a Christian, Psalm 2 says it. God's still on His throne. It's very easy. I know that there have been many times in church history when Christians have looked at what was going on in the world and said, God's lost control. This has just got to be, it could not get any worse than this. Just think about what it was like in 1348, 1349. Anybody know why I say that? Black Plague. Half of Europe dead. In some cities, 75%, everybody dead. Hal Lindsey would have made a killing. Some of you are going, what? I mean, it would have been really easy to come up with some pretty doomsday scenarios in Europe at that particular point in time. But that wasn't the end of history. And we only have a certain amount of information about what's going on right now, and we've got zero about tomorrow. And so there comes a point in time where you have to have faith in the promises of God. Sometimes we want to have knowledge of exactly what God's up to. And He doesn't promise that to us. He asks for faith. And He's asked every generation before us of that same faith. And He has promised that in the end, Christ wins. Christ wins. King of kings, Lord of lords. And there is no power that can stop Him from building His church. And might we still have some tremendously dark times to go through before that promise is brought to fruition? Yeah. Might we have to go through some of those dark times? Might our children, our grandchildren? It's possible. We also could see the beginnings of a huge revival. You don't know that. You don't know one way or the other. There could be things that take place. There could be a result of such depravity and reaching such a low that there's no place lower to go. And then all of a sudden you see revival taking place. And maybe it won't be in our nation. Maybe it'll be in other nations and it spreads here. Who knows? I don't know. God is able to do any of those things. I know that I have a tendency to be a worrywart and to see only the negative side of things. Got to keep in mind, God is capable of doing whatever He chooses to do to His honor and His glory. I'm just called to be faithful. And so, can we use these situations and this movement and our day right now as a means of gospel proclamation? Yeah, we can. Especially when dealing with people outside the church. I mean, when you think about dealing with transgenderism, you realize you've only got a half a step to get right into the gospel when you're dealing with that subject. Because when you're talking about someone's identity, the first place you're going as a Christian is you are a creature of God made in His image. And we actually believe that the one who made you entered into human flesh to offer Himself as a sacrifice for sin. I mean, you're that close. It's not like you have a long, complicated chain of argumentation to have to get there. You're right there. And so we can see these as opportunities to give testimony and to give witness. The real challenge is when it's in the church. Because now you're having to deal, and if someone makes a credible profession of faith, I have to accept that profession of faith and treat them as a Christian. I may be wrong, but I would rather be wrong in treating them as a Christian than to go the other direction and mistreat a fellow believer and treat them as an unbeliever. There are times when you have to, when enough evidence has been given to you that you have to follow biblical parameters. But there are a lot of folks, sadly, in our day, thanks to the internet, that go the other direction. And they'll just assume that you're an apostate and you're a false teacher until given evidence otherwise. And those folks don't have a lot of friends. But anyways, we won't talk about that. When it's in the church, that's extremely frustrating, because it will almost always end up in a diminishment of the proclamation of what the world needs to hear most. If you're afraid to say that Jesus gets to define all the issues about abortion and homosexuality and transgenderism and what justice is and how we're supposed to relate to one another no matter what the skin color or background or history or whatever else, when you make that proclamation that Jesus is the one who gets to do that, that's powerful. But when the church starts feeling like, well, you know, we need to be on the right side of history. Excuse me, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, which side of history was He on again from the world's perspective? I mean, seriously. That was the greatest wrong side of history action ever. But we know that it was actually the right side, simply from God's perspective. And so when the church starts worrying about what the culture is going to find acceptable, what the culture is going to, we're going to lose the next generation. Whose responsibility is the next generation? It's called the Spirit of God. Our responsibility is to be faithful to the gospel. And this whole idea that it's up to us and somehow we're supposed to do this, that, no. You're overthinking this. And unfortunately, the church is overthinking it. And as a result, taking positions that are simply frightening and disturbing and discouraging. It's discouraging to have to fight these battles within the context of the church. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we are all on the same page? But that's not the situation. And let me say in closing, before we go to the questions, I have often thought, I've never developed it, I've never written an article about it, but it has crossed my mind over and over and over again that a unified, discerning, sound church is a blessing upon any culture. It's a blessing upon any culture. So what happens when that culture comes under the judgment of God? People always ask, why are there so many divisions? Why are there so many people who call themselves Christians and they're willing to do this and they're willing to do that? And the love of the brethren has certainly waxed cold in many places. Is that enough to therefore be a discouragement to us? Should we figure, well, it's over, we need to look someplace else? No. No, I look back at the history of Israel, and I see times when God had to inform His prophet, and by the way, I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. But the prophet didn't know where they were, didn't know who they were, he didn't have their names, and sort of felt like he was the last man standing. God never has just one left. He always has His people. He always will. We tend to think that It's up to us to help God out with that. He can handle it. He's pretty good at this. Been at it for a while. You can trust him. It's your responsibility, first and foremost, for you to remain faithful, and then those that God has placed in your life, to encourage them, to disciple them, to ground them, to do what you can where God has placed you. And so there is much joy, honestly. It's not a woo joy. It is a every morning, every day, every afternoon contentment joy in serving Christ. And if we as believers allow that constant influx of information from social media to steal that joy from us, then turn the stupid stuff off. Just turn the stupid stuff off. I am tempted to do that pretty much every day. If I believed a tenth of what I read about myself on the internet, I would ride my bike off of a cliff. Just to rid the world of one of the worst people that it's ever seen. But I haven't, and I won't, because I don't believe it, because I know the truth of those matters. But at the same time, I actually know a whole lot more than my critics know about what the real me actually is. And the joy of continuing to serve Christ and to be redeemed and to not have anything to worry about. I don't have any worth in of myself. Anything that I have comes from Christ, so I don't have to worry about all that reputation stuff. That's a great joy. And the next generation, you who are the next generation, you have to get a good foundation here, because you're going to have some serious, serious challenges. And if you don't have your roots deep, I've said for a long, long time, there's a tsunami of apostasy coming. We're already seeing it. We're already seeing it. But it's only going to get bigger, with big names and big churches and big denominations that are going to cave to the pressure. It's going to happen. And if your faith is based upon looking at others in that way, you're going to be in trouble. You've got to have deep roots. And the deeper your roots are, the more you can assist those in your fellowship, your family, your fellowship, then your fellowship helping other fellowships. That's how the body works. And so you stand fast. That's all Paul could say. Having done everything, stand fast. What does that mean? Well, you've got to figure that out in your context and your situation. What does that mean? What's that going to mean for you, for your family, for your church? I think in most situations, we know what it means to stand fast. We know when they've set the altar up in front of us and the representative of Caesar is saying, okay, I want to hear it now. Caesar is Lord. Offer the pinch of incense. Say Caesar is Lord. We know when that's happening, and it's already happening in many of our experiences. Okay, with that, I will try to remember, and I always am bad at this, and I don't know why. You would think after 3.5 decades of doing this, I would remember this, but I will try to remember to repeat the question as best I can for the sake of those in the listening audience. But what that also means is if you could actually make the question under 3 minutes, it would be exceptionally helpful. And if you can do it in under 30 seconds, that's even better. That's very, very helpful to be able to do that type of a thing. So please remember that a question has a little squiggly thing at the end that goes like this. It is not your personal testimony. It is not your love of the Cardinals. By the way, we have the old Cardinals. Are you sure you don't want them back? Because we really don't want them. We never really have. There aren't any Cardinals in Arizona anyways. In the Phoenix Valley, they would all die of the heat. So it's never really fit, but anyways. So with that, questions? Yes, sir. That was, you almost put your shoulder out doing that. That was so fast.
I've heard that there's a connection between the emergent church movement and social justice movement. Is there?
Well, I'm not even sure how to define the emergent church movement any longer, but those who were definitional of it in the past most definitely are very much involved in the social justice movement. And you can see why. The emergent church was basically, the emergent church put everything out on the table for renegotiation. Everything from the Trinity on down. I mean, that's what made the emergent church the emergent church. And so that fits very, very well with critical theory, which does the same thing. Let's break it all down. Let's get rid of any patriarchy, any type of hierarchy, patriarchy, anything that ends with a key. We don't like it. And so, that birthed out of the same type of mindset. Very consistent, yeah.
Writing on the question he just asked, okay, you take what, compare what they actually do, feeding the poor and, housing the homeless, all this other stuff, and then what they say everybody should be doing. How does that match up? Could you give it a percentage? Are they 20% of the time? Are they actually doing what they say?
Who are they?
The social justice churches.
There's no way of analyzing. There's no way of analyzing that. We need to realize that there are conservative. When I say conservative churches that still hold to Orthodox Christian theology, who have, for various reasons, become deeply influenced by the social justice movement, and they've come by it honestly. They're the ones that I think they're in the most danger because they don't really realize. It's sort of like when you they don't realize that they are bringing in worldview issues that are fundamentally inconsistent with their own profession. And so we have to recognize that there are fellow Christians involved. That's why we cannot just simply use a flamethrower in dealing with this situation. We have to begin with a gracious understanding and attempt to, as best we can, stand firm for the gospel. That's always the difficult thing. Balance and speaking as a grace-dependent, redeemed sinner, at the same time defending the truth. That requires a tremendous amount of maturity and a tremendous amount of energy. It's much easier, honestly, it is much easier to adopt the Uzi platform. Just rack it in there and start shooting. That's a lot easier. But that is inconsistent with grace. It's inconsistent with the message. So I don't think there's any way of analyzing social justice churches as a whole, because the churches represented by Union Theological Seminary would be churches that aren't even orthodox any longer in regards to the Trinity, the deity of Christ, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, any of that stuff. So do you even count them? Because I wouldn't even consider them Christian churches. But then you have Christian churches that continue to hold to a form of orthodoxy in their creeds, but there's no expression of that in the life of the church. Are they really Christian churches? I don't know. You get to a point where now you have a mixture, and then you get to the point where you have churches that only 10 years ago were solidly orthodox, and now they're adopting this stuff, and so the vast majority of people in those churches are Christians, and you just have the leadership falling into doctrinal error and a misunderstanding of these things, and how do you relate to them? And what the percentage of feeding the poor or anything else would be by putting all those churches together, I have no earthly idea, neither does anybody else for that matter. But it's those churches that I'm most concerned about. It's the ones that still are filled with true believers who are now experiencing the cognizant dissonance of I still hold to the gospel and I understand what unifies Christians, but now I'm being told that there's these other categories and I'm being, well, you all saw, or did you? Did you all see the song that was sung at, it was either MLK 50 or the TGC right afterwards, by the choir from Matt Chandler's church? The song, now, by the way, you need to give these folks kudos, because if you're a songwriter, you want the toughest assignment you'll ever have. They actually sang a song that had been written by someone in the church that contained, as one of the lines, a reference, you ready for this? To microaggressions. Now, a microaggression, in case you don't know, a microaggression is something that people who have privilege do to people who have less privilege, and it comes out of their ignorance of the experience. So it's a standpoint epistemology thing. You don't know what it's like to be them, and so you do stupid stuff to them, okay? And so you have macroaggressions where you're actually expressing, say, racist ideas. But microaggressions is where you would do stuff that is offensive, but you don't even know it's offensive. Now here's the thing. How do you fit microaggressions into any song? What does that rhyme with? What meter can you even get it into? I mean, they did it. They actually pulled it off. Now, am I going to say that Matt Chandler's church, it does not have Christians in it, it's an apostate church? And no. There's great believers there. But at the same time, it's really, really, really obvious that Matt Chandler has really gotten into all sorts of categories that come from critical theory. And so what do I want to do? I want to encourage him to reconsider that and to critically analyze critical theory to see that it is inconsistent in and of itself with biblical parameters. There was a, yes ma'am. Oh. Now did you use hand sanitizers? No, I'm sorry. No, oh, yes. Yeah, okay. Last night, if I say Founders Synodoc, how many of you know what I'm talking about? Founders Synodoc. Okay. Founders Ministry, Tom Askell, started working on they call it a synodoc, so a cinematic documentary, I guess is what it means, called By What Standard? And they put out a trailer back in July that caused a nuclear explosion and left me pretty well burnt. But it was released last night. The Founders Conference is going on right now, I think somewhere down Cape Coral, probably in Florida. And they released it last night, so I haven't seen it yet. But this particular question is directly related to that. We watched a video where a professor at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, this is Matt Hall, admitted being racist and that he would be a racist until his glorification based on our obedience as Christians to confession, repentance, forgiveness, and sanctification. How should we respond to someone who makes that assertion? Well, what's fascinating, as some of you probably already know, is that 2 weeks ago, I think it was it about 2 weeks ago? I think it was about 2 weeks ago. Matt Hall wrote an article for the Southern Baptist website, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary website, completely repudiating critical theory, which was plainly what was behind the assertions that he had made as late as 2016. So I, on the dividing line last week, said, I'm really thankful for this repudiation and this criticism of critical theory, but I'm not the only one going, so could you explain what you were saying before in light of what you're saying now? Because it sounds like what you're saying now is that what you were saying before was hooey. But I don't get the feeling that that's actually what you're saying. So I'm confused. Could we get some clarification on this? The statement that Matthew Hall made is based upon the acceptance of the parameters of white privilege, and that if you're born white, you're born a racist, and that you are guilty of racism, and you always will be a racist until you die. And that requires the social justice definition of racism, not the biblical definition of racism. This is what I was saying earlier today, is that this is where the confusion comes in. Because we as Christians want to define terms biblically. So if you're going to say that racism is a sin, then you're talking about biblical parameters, and that means anyone can commit that sin. But that's the problem, because what he was saying is he is that way because of who he is and what group he's a part of. That's not the biblical view. So you have this, you have this crossing over, creating this third category that doesn't make sense in either one of the previous categories. And so the answer to the question is yes, if we have repentance and faith and believe, then we are cleansed of our sin, and obviously, if we are taking the biblical definition of racism, anyone, man, woman, or child of any race can commit the sin of racism. But that wasn't what he was saying, and so that's why a lot of us are confused. What is the current position? Because a lot of people feel that that professor is the most likely successor to Albert Mohler at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. So that's a big question. That's a big question. Yeah, definitely. You know, you've been keeping the sound going and got here early, and your wife says she hasn't seen you for days, and so I guess you can ask a question. That makes you what? Yes, you definitely are oppressing your wife, yes. In fact, she said you've been doing that for many years, so we need to talk after. So.
Guilty. We had a couple questions from.
Okay.
And we couldn't stay for the evening session. It's a two-part question. This is a gospel at stake kind of issue. On a personal level, should a person be ready to draw a line in the sand the fellowship that they're part of is adopting these principles of social justice? And at pastoral level, he actually cites a couple of SBC pastors who are in disagreement, of course, with the social justice movement, see it as a gospel issue, but yet they're unwilling to leave the SBC for personal reasons, financial, fear, disruption of their body, their pastor.
Right. Okay, it is a two-part question. So remind me of the second part about not leaving the SBC. I know churches who have. I know one church, a major church, was it Muscle Shoals or something Shoals, that left recently. I don't see that the SBC has as yet, even with Resolution 9. Resolution 9 may be preparing the SBC to do that, but it hasn't done it yet. And so I don't see anything specifically that would demand leaving the SBC. Now, there are a lot of churches who have said, well, we're going to withhold cooperative funds if any of those funds are going to be being sent to promote this kind of stuff. And there is, you know, it's very plain to me that certain of the seminaries are taking the lead in promoting this kind of stuff. It just seems blatantly obvious that that is the case. And so I can understand why a group of elders, a pastor in a Southern Baptist church would go, don't want to have our name associated with that. We're not going to be associated with something if we're not giving to its missions work and things like that. So I can understand that. That obviously is something that has to be determined by the individual eldership of that particular church in light of what they see and in light of what they're experiencing. On the personal level, this is the issue. Critical theory divides, and this is what it's meant to do. It is meant to create these divisions. You heard me reading from James Cone. There is nothing more divisive than that could possibly be. And so I want to try to counteract what critical theory is designed to do. So I want to, in every way that I can, seek unity and graciously keep doors and avenues of communication open. It's once you I want the woke person to have to be the one that draws the line and says no more of you, not the other way around. Now the problem is within the church, if it's getting to the point where in the ministry of the church, the teaching of the church, that this is something that this person is just insisting upon. This is more pastoral, I guess, but if they're insistent upon promoting this stuff within the fellowship of the church and getting people involved in that kind of thing, well, then you really have to, you do have to draw a line in the sand at that point, because if it gets to the point where people are saying, well, we need to have these certain kinds of spaces, or we need to rethink what we believe about sexual morality or about the nature of marriage, yeah, that comes a point where pastorally there's no way to continue to have fellowship within that context. But when it comes on the personal level, when it's not being taught in the church, if it's my neighbor across the street, he goes to a different church, but we've always had good fellowship, and now they're getting into all this woke stuff. I want him to be the one that slams the door in my face, not the other way around. I'd rather be light in that situation and constantly trying to invite that person my direction than the other. That's how it would go. Yes, sir.
We've heard a lot throughout the past couple of years of stuff that issue about like corporate guilt and you know, guilt over and white kind of thing. Is there a place for proper corporate guilt in the church? Say in like the area of abortion, is a Christian more individual level guilty if they are not active against it?
Well, there has, in our own country, even as late as World War II, there were public prayers of contrition and repentance that would be offered in our own country. Certainly during the Civil War, there was, many people during the Civil War saw this massive loss of life as a judgment from God upon the country for various reasons. There were more sound Christians in the South than the North at that time, and so they viewed things differently, but still saw it as judgment of God for sin and so on and so forth. So there's always been that kind of an understanding. But my concern is that, again, what has happened is that the woke movement will take appropriate biblical categories, for example, from the Old Testament, where the covenant people of God made confession because Deuteronomy 28:29. I mean, you're a covenant people. You're going to be held accountable. You have the representative principle with Achan, for example, what happens at Ai, and so on and so forth. You have that with the covenant people of God. They bring that into this conversation so as to attach it to the idea of oppression and justice being derived from outside of Scripture. That's where the problem comes in. There can be guilt for sin, but it needs to be sin. And so if you're trying to tell white America that they need to feel guilty about things that whites did in the past, while at the same time telling black America that they can't even commit that sin, what are you doing? What are you accomplishing there? You're perverting the message. And we see the results of that. So I've heard people, I could name names, and some of the names were named during the panel discussion that was played at 2 o'clock this afternoon. But I can name names of leaders who are doing exactly that. They are taking biblical paradigms and examples and then attaching them to grossly unbiblical concepts and definitions. That's what we need to be looking for. If you're calling for the repentance of the American church for being focused upon possessions rather than purity, great, because that's an easy accusation to prove, and we're guilty. But we're all guilty, and it's not because of who our great-grandfather was. And at the same time, we can talk about that in that general church sense. But that doesn't mean that there have not been Christians who have been particularly holy in that very thing, and that not that there hasn't been churches that have eschewed physical comfort for purity. So you can't say it's a universal thing either. You can just observe general trends. And again, I keep forgetting to even repeat the question. It's like my brain just won't do it. Yes, sir. And by the way, if someone could give me a cup of water, I'd really appreciate it. Yes.
I'm trying to speak up.
Oh.
Earlier, when you were talking about the issue of homosexuality, I kind of go back to that for a second. And I have friends who are homosexual, I have family members, and so you mentioned, there's a lot of verses, and I know what a lot of these are. On the topic of Sodom and Gomorrah, I got into some discussions on what's going on there, and one of the kind of the odder defenses that I've heard people use what's going on in that story, trying to say that it wasn't destroyed because of homosexuality, and of course it's not. And maybe this is kind of a bizarre angle, but could you explain...
A question of Lot?
Of Lot, the person of Lot?
Yeah.
Can you explain what is going on with Lot offering up his daughters to these men? Because one of the questions I heard, if these men were actually guilty of practicing homosexuality, why would he have offered up his own daughters to these men? And then they get on the subject of Lot and say, well, look what he did. Look what he did was so much worse than what he was doing. I'm like...
Yeah, the writer of the Hebrews didn't interpret it that way. There's an entire chapter in the same-sex controversy on Genesis 18 and 19 that goes through the text rather carefully in light of the 4 or 5 standard defenses that are offered. The general standard defense is that what is actually being discussed in Genesis 18:19 is gang rape, and it has nothing to do. This is always the defense you'll get. This has nothing to do with loving monogamous homosexual relationships. As if loving monogamous homosexual relationships is a biblical category to begin with. The scriptures recognize no such thing. And in fact, the scriptures would not place that within the context of loving in the first place, because a homosexual relationship by definition is narcissistic. You're loving a mirror image of yourself. The woman is an Eitzer Kenegdo. Like me, and yet correspondingly different. That's how she is created to the man. She is an Eitzer Kenegdo. Helpmate is how it's translated. That's not really a great translation, but it's not easy to translate. A homosexual relationship that's never what you have. You're looking at a mirror image of yourself physically. And so it would never be defined as loving. It may be, you may do anything for that person, But love is defined biblically. God gets to determine what the proper parameters even of love are. If he can command that you love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, he gets to define what love is. And so the whole idea of a loving and then monogamous, all studies have demonstrated that 99.8% of homosexuals are not monogamous to begin with. That's just reality. There is no sexual group known to modern science that is more likely to engage in multiple partner sex than male homosexuals. There just isn't. And so the whole idea of loving monogamous homosexual relationships zeroes it down to a tiny, tiny, tiny little group becoming the paradigm that overthrows the 99.9%. And so the argument normally is whatever's going on there had to do with gang rape. It was non-consensual, therefore it's not relevant to anything that we have to say. If you follow the story carefully, it begins a chapter earlier with a statement that a great evil is said to be in Sodom and Gomorrah. And the two angels go down to find out if this is so. By the way, God doesn't need to send angels down. There's a reason why this is happening the way it's happening. Let's get the angels in there and the whole development of the story. But aside from the gang rape argument, the next most common argument is that in Ezekiel 49, I think, it's off the top of my head, 49 or 50, there is a reference to the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah being inhospitality. The problem is that's actually not Ezekiel. It's verse 49. I think it's verse 50, somewhere in Ezekiel. Someone look it up for me. And the very next verse, after talking about inhospitality, says, "And they did that which was to'evah in my sight." To'evah is the term for abomination. And there is one sexual sin listed in Leviticus that is to'evah, homosexuality. So even when we wrote the book, this was back in 2001, Daniel Helminiak, a gay Roman Catholic priest, had written a book, and he quoted from that text. And it's not even Ezekiel, it's Jeremiah, isn't it?
Ezekiel
16:49?
48.
I knew it was in the 40s. That's where I was getting the 40s, right? So there it is in Ezekiel. And so it lists inhospitality, but then Helminiak stopped quoting there. He broke the sentence, stopped quoting there. And the very next part, the very next verse, used the term abomination, which anyone, if they knew the Levitical law, would know that what was being referred to there was the sin of homosexuality. So those are the two primary defenses that I have encountered, is that this doesn't have anything to do with loving monogamous because it's gang rape. And then the other one, it wasn't homosexuality, it was inhospitality. Now they certainly were inhospitable to the angels, duh.
Have you ever heard anybody say, well, look at what Lot did, like why?
I've never heard that as having anything to do other than I just don't accept this as scripture as to why Lot did what he did in the offering of his daughters. I do have a section on that in the book and the various possibilities that might represent in regards to he's buying time. He knows that they're not going to do that because he already knows them. The one thing you have to keep in mind is that he is called righteous Lot in Hebrews. And so how he acted to us from an American perspective looks pretty bad, but there were rules and regulations that existed in that day that even if we fully understood them, we would not embrace them in our day. That may be in play there that we're just not aware of. So I'll let the writer of the Hebrews define that more than me. 1648 through 50, I think. Yeah.
1648 to 50.
Thank you.
It's in verse 50 where it says, "And they were haughty and committed abomination before me, therefore I took them away as I saw good." That's the word you're talking about.
Toeva. Which is the only sexual sin that Toeva is used of is homosexuality.
And it's 2 Peter chapter 3 that you're talking about, where Lot is described 3 times as the King James will say just in verse.
That's right.
And then twice in verse 8 the word righteous, and it's probably the same
Right.
Greek word. And that's a mystery to me. I don't understand why Peter will describe Lot as being just or righteous. Because I don't see that in Genesis. Maybe you can help me to understand that.
That's kind of my question.
I'm sorry?
That's kind of like my question to you. Like, he did this, from our perspective, this horrible thing, altering his daughters, and yet.
Well, the scriptures never condemn him for that, so there might have been a reason that we don't know. He might have been well aware of the fact that they would not accept them. He identifies their action as evil. And as soon as he does, he says, "Do not do this evil deed." And that's when they turn upon him and the angels have to blind them. And please notice something. God sends 2 angels to save Lot. And it is in Hebrews 11 where it talks about, I think there is something in Hebrews 11, if I'm recalling correctly, about his soul being vexed by the sin of the people around him. So I think the willingness to throw Lot under the bus is our Americanized interpretation of an ancient text that's nearly 3,000 years old. We don't know what the context was. The writers back then did, and they said he was righteous in what he did, and God delivered him, and almost only him, out of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that should be enough for us. The description is there. That should be enough for us to recognize that he may not have been a perfect man. He didn't recognize the angels for who they were immediately. He did, however, insist that the angels come into his home. He engaged in hospitality. He knew they were in danger. They knew they were in danger too, but that's part of the story. He sought to protect them, which was what hospitality was all about, which is part of the Ezekiel thing. They were being inhospitable to him. His son-in-laws are shown to be unrighteous in their behavior, and even his wife is shown to have been compromised by the context in which he was in. He remained obedient and didn't look back, and he was not punished. So he was obedient to the commands of the angel, and as such was delivered. There's your biblical evidence.
I don't want to drag this on for too much longer because I know other people want to ask questions, but what you just said about his sons-in-law, is it understood that he could possibly have more daughters because he offered up his daughter under the assumption that they had never been with a man? And I was thinking about that about a week ago, where he said sons-in-law, but he was talking about his daughters being virgins.
I don't know. I don't know. We're not given all the information. Not given all the information. Are we continuing on with this?
It's related, but not focusing on Sodom and Gomorrah.
Okay.
In your multiple debates on homosexuality, has anyone brought up an example from the ancient world of committed monogamous relationships?
No.
Because I know of one example, and I only found it because I'm a military history nerd. The Sacred Band of Peace, 500 bonded pairs who went into battle chained to their husband during the Peloponnesian War.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the chained part means committed in quite the same way.
There is at least one example that predates the writing of the New Testament from the same general area that Paul's missionary journeys went to.
So these were homosexuals
Yes.
who were committed to each other and chained together?
they would fight, time, change, whatever, because the account is 200 years after the battle where they all died.
Yeah, that seems to be a very effective methodology. Yeah.
Tied to their partner so that one couldn't run away because he was chained to his husband.
It doesn't sound like a real commitment to me. That's what you do to your wife too? Okay, yeah.
And I was wondering if you had ever heard of it in your...
I had not, no. I think the fact that they all died probably somewhat vitiates the example in a debate, yeah. But no, I had not heard of that before. That's interesting.
I was over here this afternoon, so I didn't get to hear any discussion on the income inequality. But I was in a discussion with a fellow, and I said, taxes are unfair because a portion of we pay a portion for our national defense and roads and stuff like that. So they kind of tried his mind when comparing Joseph had they had doves for the sin offering. Is that just my idea that anyone ever approached that idea during the whole discussion?
Well, I'm sure that it has been broached in various contexts. I hadn't done a discussion on quote unquote income equality outside of the reality that when we talk about cosmic justice and biblical justice and God's law has nothing against prospering. In fact, it considers it God's blessing upon an individual. There is nothing that could be derived from any contextual reading of Scripture that would support the communal communist concept of quote-unquote income equality. The rich in Scripture are only upbraided and condemned when they trust in their riches and do not see that they came to them from God. The communist or socialist idea that you should spread the misery around and that we all should not have enough, because that's what communism and socialism always has been and always can be, is far removed from any type of concept of biblical justice. I mean, tell me where God's law says you're to use equal balances. It doesn't mean that if you work hard and you invest and you do what you can, and you just happen to be a person who is very good at this kind of thing, that God would not prosper you, and as a result, you can be a rich individual and be righteous in being rich. And there are people who squander. The Proverbs talk about the person who's too lazy to lift his hand to his mouth. And there's nothing in Scripture that says that it's a good thing to aid and abet that behavior. And in fact, I hate to have to tell you, but that meanie patriarchal dude, Paul, made it very clear, if they will not work, they should not eat. Oh, it's so hateful. No, it's not. It's not hateful. It's hateful to steal from people who work hard to provide for their families and their grandchildren. That's hateful. But we live in a day where if you prosper, and Vodi talked about this afternoon, if you prosper and you are in the oppressor group, then your prosperity is inappropriate and unjust. If you prosper as one of the oppressed, cool, great, that's wonderful, congratulations. Makes no sense, but that's how it works. That's how it works. So yeah, now I don't know how far you can take your particular argument, because the Roman taxation system was anything but just. Now they did that because that was God's law, but they would have been being taxed by Rome beyond that, and Rome taxed the poor and kept them down that way. So there was a systemic abuse of the taxation system. That's why you have Zacchaeus doing what Zacchaeus did. He had to give, when he gave back all that money, he gave back all that money because he had inappropriately taken that money from people in the first place. And so you had a situation in Jesus' day, interestingly enough, where you not only had the temple tax and things like that, but then you had the burdensome, onerous Roman taxes on top of that. So taxation has been a way that's been used in the past to keep the poor poor and the rich rich. America has done an amazingly good job to not do that. That's going to change. But really has. In comparison to Rome, wow, are we an improvement? Big time. Big time. Someone back here their arm was going to fall off.
You said you were used to be a fundamentalist?
Independent fundamentalist, not King James only Baptist.
What's the best way to approach someone who's been influenced by Stephen Anderson?
I didn't catch the last part.
My son and his family.
Okay. Okay. You don't know who Stephen Anderson is? Well, you're a blessed man. Yeah. Well, we're leaving behind our last topic by a bit here, but Stephen Anderson is the pastor of Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona. He is world famous for being tased by the Border Patrol once, and I can still hear his screaming in my voice, in my head. But he's best known for kicking his pulpit, standing on his pulpit, screaming about Calvinists, and screaming about me in about every other sermon. Okay, he is a King James only Holocaust denier. He's not stupid. He is a professional, he has functioned as a professional German translator. He speaks fluent German. He's a bright guy, but he's completely imbalanced, just completely imbalanced. So sometimes he can act really nicely, and if you want to see him acting really nicely, watch the 2-hour and 20-minute interview I did with him. He was interviewing me for a movie he was making. I think they used 30 seconds of the 2 hours and 20 minutes in the movie. Yeah, he's in Tempe. We're in Phoenix. And he is well known to my fellow pastor, Jeff Durbin, because he hates Jeff pretty much as he hates me. And they've been involved in the same homeschool co-ops and stuff like that. And so yeah, he's pretty well known. And his movement has gained some amount of traction. It took a pretty serious shot last year, about a year ago. They were calling themselves the NIFB, the New Independent Fundamentalist Baptists. And they were doing podcasts and all the rest of the stuff. And then they had a big blow up right about this time last year. Big split. Anderson was involved. There are still a lot of unanswered questions about money and all sorts of other stuff in that mess. That if I were him or certain other people I could name, I would have been delving into that stuff and digging into it and all the rest of the stuff. Don't have time to, let alone any interest in it.
Why are you getting tased by the Border Patrol?
I don't know. That, look it up. Look up Stephen Anderson tased and just enjoy it. But to the question, what you have to find out is what is the attraction. Generally, the attraction is he is seen as non-compromising.
Okay, let me just say, after the debacle last year, when he surrendered two of the
Right.
guys in the church,
Right.
it split.
Right.
Well, now my son is
Yes.
now they want his sermon.
But I think he was one of the ones that was on the opposite side of Anderson. Right, right. I would like to think that how that man was treated, Adam Fannin, I would think that the way he was treated might have opened his eyes to the abusive nature of the NIFB movement as a whole. Because 1 week he's with these guys and they're ripping and snorting on me and Jeff and everybody else, accusing us of homosexuality, the whole 9 yards. And the next week he is now a false teacher and he's on the outs. You would think that would make somebody go, you know, maybe accusing people you've never actually met of things isn't really a good idea. And you would hope that that would be the case. But you
can tell he's still very influenced by the teaching.
I wish I could tell you how it is that when I was at G3 this year, we had dozens of people coming up to us. Ask Rich, he was standing there. Dozens of people coming up to us saying, I was once Independent Fundamentalist Baptist, and then I ran into Jeff's stuff, I ran into your stuff, and you know, we've gotten out. I wish I could tell you why that is. I think what it is that once you get into it, it's not satisfying. It may be attractive for a while, but there's no depth to it, and it becomes tiresome after a while. I'm sorry? No, there isn't. It's very, very, you keep yourself in it. And so I wish I could tell you, other than the fact that we have demonstrated over years of teaching that you can believe that the Bible is the Word of God, you can be bold in your proclamation, but you don't have to lose grace. And I think that's just something that the Spirit of God has to birth in somebody's heart. I wish I could give you a better answer than that.
So living that, knowing that, and then we're not supposed to learn salvation between Him and God. However, like you said, when we tell you that they're a Christian, then it's a sweetheart.
Well, I tend to try to leave the judgment of the heart to God. Obviously, there are people who are just so completely out of control and so completely out of biblical parameters that, you know, I do not consider Steven Anderson my brother, but he denies the centrality of repentance and salvation. That would be the primary reason for it, not just his crazy behavior. Believe me, there are certain people I know that engage in crazy behavior on a regular basis that, you know, I have to leave that in God's hands. So we're running out of time. Yes?
I was asked, how would you recommend that we ring the bell on this topic? We're not desensitized to it enough yet that people still see through race theory and intersectionality.
Well, if they've ever heard of it.
Okay. Well, when it's explained to them,
right.
Like these few days, everyone recognized it as an evil, as an attraction. And you've got state-level associations like Tennessee just condemnation of
Resolution 9, right?
Missouri tried, but it wasn't properly filed paperwork-wise, so we didn't vote on it. But like an hour south of here, there's 20 churches every square mile. And I would imagine that 75% of them haven't even heard of it.
Right.
So
when you ring the bell, you mean sound the warning?
Yeah, like over here.
Yeah.
While there's still discernment, while they're not desensitized, make them aware.
Well, that's a good question. I understand. Well, I think some people are trying to do that, like Founders is certainly attempting to do that. Oh, are you? Okay, yeah. They're certainly trying to do things similar to that in sounding the warning. We certainly have, not in the sense that we've wanted this to become the primary focus of what we do or anything like that, but it is consistent with seeking to benefit the body and provide information to the body. But I think I think it can be done on the personal level in the fact that when I get together with Christians, conversations of what's going on in our society, conversations about what's happening in the nation. I mean, it's just about to be 2020. We're just about to enter, can you believe we're going to be a fifth of the way through the next century? That's pretty hard for me to believe. Certainly tells me how old I'm getting. But this is what is coming. And so there's all sorts of natural opportunities for conversation about things. Every single day gives examples of intersectionality and transgenderism. And if you're talking to people who've never heard of intersectionality, it's easy to come up with examples from today's news where some political person made a point based upon intersectionality. So you can use that to introduce, yeah, can you believe that, you know, what someone such and such a person said, demonstrating that they're totally sold out to intersectionality. Well, what does that mean? Well, here's what it means, and here's why it's problematic for us as a Christian. And so you can do that on a personal level. I stink at marketing, so I'm not a good Paul Revere guy by any stretch of the imagination. So we do our little webcast and then and sort of leave it to the local churches to go from there. But oh, sure, yeah, you bet, yeah. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Synodoc when I get a chance to do so. I haven't yet, so we hope that it will function in that way. There's a book, a friend of mine, Biola, just put out a book on social justice and critical theory. There are some pamphlets coming out. There's at least some resources. Neil Shenvi's putting some stuff out that's finally, you know, you can give to folks. But we're up against a juggernaut. They've got all the money. They've got the media, they've got the money, and they are taking over most of the academic aspects as well. And so it's going to be a challenge. But the reality is, a true believer, once they're faced with the reality of what's actually being said, if they haven't been slowly brought into it, just recoils from it. Like, what? What are you talking about? How can that be? So, one more, yes.
So you're witnessing to a homosexual, and they tell you that they have homosexual desires, and God gave them this homosexual desires. Is that a correct statement, and how do you respond to that?
Thank you. Well, first of all, if a person tells me that God gave them their homosexual desires, then I'm going to need to find out if what they are saying is that God created me this way, and therefore it's natural for me to experience these, or whether they're saying that this is a gift from God, and that means it makes it a good thing. Those are related, but not necessarily the same claims. When a person says that God made me this way, then my question is going to be, how do you know this? What is you seem to believe that God exists. You seem to believe that God is creator and that he does things intentionally and purposefully. So what is your source of revelation? Are you the source of revelation? Do you receive revelation from God? Do you receive scriptural, do you have scriptural authority in and of yourself? Where is this source? If they're saying that simply that God has made everything good, and therefore if I experience homosexual feelings, that makes them good by definition. Again, this is a claim to know something about God. And in that situation, I'm always going to say, well, you know, the one that I trust to know God was God in human flesh. And he proved that by rising from the dead. And he said this. And so when people say, for example, that Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, I automatically know this is a person who has no idea what they're talking about. Because Jesus honored God's law. He said he had came to fulfill that law, that law is holy. His disciples pointed us to that law. And that law specifically says that homosexuality is not something that is good in God's sight, but brings God's judgment. And so not only you have Paul, and you have 3 times in the New Testament expanding upon and explaining that reality in Romans chapter 1, 1 Corinthians 6, and 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 10. So I'm going to I'm going to question the source of authority that this person is using, because they're making an authority claim, and they're trying to bind you to that authority claim, when in reality they are elevating their simple personal experience and extrapolating from their personal experience to make a claim about who God is and what God has done. That's a dangerous thing to do, and I would want to warn them that it's a dangerous thing to do. But you have to think, I would say you have to think presuppositionally. What is the presupposition of the claim that they are making? And the claim that they're making is to have revelational knowledge from God. So how do they substantiate that? Especially over against revelational knowledge from God that has as its foundation something as earth-shaking as the empty tomb. Okay? Okay. All right. So, as you walk out this evening, I do not want you walking out this evening thinking to yourself, oh, woe is me. Life is so bad, and the world's going to end tomorrow. If I gave you that impression, please forgive me. I do tend to be a realist, and I do tend to be one that says we need to be prepared to be faithful in the midst of great trial and tribulation, because I study church history. But I don't want you to miss the fact that despite my concern about the future and my concern for my grandchildren and my children and your grandchildren, I remain absolutely confident that God is still in control of his world, that he has not been caught by surprise, and that anything he calls me or my children or my grandchildren to endure and to experience, he will give me and them the grace and the power to endure and to do so with the peace that passes understanding. And so I would strongly say to each one of you, before you allow feelings of worry and concern to overcome you, remember Jesus said that worrying about tomorrow will accomplish absolutely nothing, because you cannot extend your life, you cannot do anything about tomorrow, but you can trust in a loving Heavenly Father. And so if the scriptures written to people who are going to be suffering for hundreds of years under Roman oppression could talk about the peace that passes all understanding, a peace that the world cannot understand, if believers then could have that peace, we can have that peace together. We can have that peace today as well. So don't let the weight of the subject rob you of the peace that comes from knowing that your sins have been forgiven, you're accepted in the Father, and that there is nothing in this world that can separate you from his love. Okay? Let's pray together. Our Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this day that you have given to us, the opportunity we have had to reason together from your word, to consider your truth. And Lord, we do live in a dark day. We live where there is much deception and untruth all around us. We would ask that you would make us lights of grace, that even as we seek to battle the darkness, that we will do so as individuals who have been delivered therefrom, always recognizing that those who we might view as our enemies may well be our brothers and sisters in a very short period of time. And so make us to be gracious, firm, and always to recognize that you have called us to be at peace with you and that you have promised us your peace. May we have that peace that passes all understanding. May it give us true joy and contentment in our service to you. We do pray for the persecuted church. We do pray for those this night that are separated from their loved ones because of the name of Jesus. We thank you for them. We pray that you would draw near to them, that they would sense your presence by your Spirit, that you would lift them up, and that you would grant them freedom. Be with them, we pray this evening. In Jesus' name, amen.